Hello Bethany, it's great to have you on Let's Talk. Now, urban life at the museum, I gather this is a chance for young people to tell us about what sort of city they'd like to live in future. And this is really interesting coming from a museum because I always imagine that young people think of, oh, fuddy-duddy museum full of old stuff. So how are you managing to make this happen?
Well, that exact attitude is why we've tried to engage young people into the museum and to showcase to them that it actually is not a place just for old fuddy-duddy things, and make it relevant to the youth of our city and a place that they want to come to and to experience all the amazing things that we have within the museum.
And so how have you managed to pull in sufficient young people to do stuff to get this to happen?
So it started as a community outreach project to access young people between the age of 15 and 24 to create a space that was relevant to them within the museum. So we've worked with youth organisations that are already operating around in different areas within Auckland City. We've teed them and their young people up with an established artist and asked them to each respond to an issue that is relevant to them. We've sourced the issues from the Macro Auckland report so that at the end of this project we can take the information that our youth offer to us to inform a report of sorts that we will introduce to the youth panel as part of the Auckland Council. So it's this really cyclic kind of
very circular sort
project.
Of plan,
yeah.
So what sort of response have you had from young people who've been involved? I mean, are they the sort of kids who would have come into the museum before, except dragged unwillingly on a school trip? Or, I mean, have they been surprised and delighted at what they've discovered?
Yeah, I mean, there's been this, it's hard to generalise because there's such a broad range of young people that we've worked with. But there are attitudes, I haven't been here since I was a kid, or I love the museum, you know, it's really quite varied. And it is, I thought I'd just go there and see rusty swords or those kinds of things, but actually being able to, because in the process of us introducing them to the collections, we've been quite specific about the types of information that we show them. Mm-hmm. So we've selected materials that are relevant to them, and I think that makes it easier for them to access. All
right, so give me a for instance.
For instance, one of our groups is the Ngāti Whātua Rangatahi, and most of them work for Ko Te Pūkaki Ecological Restoration Project, which at the moment for the past 8 or so years, they've been replanting Bastion Point with native plant life.
There's a lot of land there to replant, isn't
absolutely,
it?
yeah. So they're daily working with native plants. So when they came into the museum, we showed them Banks Florilegium, so some of the original hand drawings of our native flora.
So Joseph Banks was the biologist on Captain Cook's ship on one of his voyages, wasn't he?
Yep.
So and he did those beautiful drawings and engravings. So they're actually able to access that from centuries ago.
Yes, and compare it to the plants that they work with daily.
And then how have they moved that on into a creative project of their own?
And we also showed them photographs from the Bastion Point occupation as well to show the kind of what their family have done to retain their land.
And that was 1960s?
1978.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so then we've matched them up with DLT, who is a hip-hop pioneer in Aotearoa. He's also a Graff artist, and he does a lot of work in the communities using graffiti as a positive means of communication for young people.
Right.
So he's worked with these Ngāti Whātua Rangatahi to produce a Graff mural.
Right.
And they've made stencils that have been derived from the plants that they work with, and created this mural piece.
Right. Is it wonderful?
It's beautiful.
Yeah. So public will be able to go and see this lovely mural with all of its old echoes, but its new energy as well.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing about it is it's going to go into Māori Court. So Māori Court is full of all these traditional carvings that are kind of this one palette of reddish brown.
Yeah.
And then this is this beautiful splash of vibrant colour that's going to be right in the middle of Māori Court. So
sounds great.
Yeah. It's going
now
to be really
I'm interested
exciting.
too in one called Talk Housing, where you've involved some people from a group called IMGI, which means these are young people from Glen Innes, which of course has been so much in the news lately with protests there about the removal of houses. So what have they been working on?
So we've teed them up with again a hip hop producer, Matt Salapu Whaiamu, who is a hip hop producer from the Hypnotics, But he's worked, and he also recently did the APO Remix the Orchestra, so he's worked with Auckland Philharmonia Orchestra, matching them up with hip-hop artists from South Auckland and doing this big kind of
fun,
mash-up.
Yes.
So what he's done with IMGI is we've armed the young people with sound recording devices. They came into the museum and recorded the sounds of, we have a 2-metre long lali drum, wooden log drum, Samoan, in our Pacific Lifeways gallery. So they played that and they sampled that sound. They went into the community and interviewed people around the area about GI and about the housing issues. They got sounds of the birds from the park down at Tahuna Torea. So they've captured sounds of their community and then they've edited those sounds into a 6-minute soundscape.
Wow.
So,
they went into a production studio and morphed it all together into something that's really wonderfully listenable, no doubt.
Absolutely, yeah. So they were. I mean, that's Matt's skill, is that he's, as a hip hop producer, he samples sounds and turns them into beats. So the bass of the the bass of the lully drum becomes the bass drum beat within the soundscape, or they've got a bird sound that they've cued and sampled as part of the melody.
Okay, maybe the bird might come up repetitively against a boom, boom, boom.
And then there's voices and snippets of interviews and all sorts of things within it. So when you come into the museum, we're building a little house installation where visitors can step inside and be completely immersed by the soundscape experience. And it's surround sound as well, so you've got buses coming behind you and then things happening in front of you and all sorts of stuff. So
sounds great.
Yeah, it's very emotive.
And so there's one too about economic well-being. And so I see your information says the museum's galleries, manuscripts and the work of early feminist photographers. I'm not aware of the names of early feminist photographers, so are used for something new. So what's that all about?
So Massive Company is a theatre company who use devised theatre, where they will look at, they'll read a letter or they'll look at a photograph and then draw inspiration from that to devise characters. So we've given them the challenge of economic well-being, which is quite a big intangible kind of concept.
Yeah, and it could sound quite grey and amorphous and not that interesting too, couldn't it, until you get into it and think about what that really means.
Yeah, and so the technique that they've used is they've devised a human character, a non-human character, and then infused it with their own personal experiences. So, for example, one of the young ladies, Margaret Matilda White, is one of the photographers that we have in our collections, and she did a lot of work out at Carrington at the hospital taking photographs of the nurses, and she did all these kind of compositions with the nurses in their uniforms, and there's some really interesting photographic moments and little guys in the window looking through from the back and that kind of thing. So one of the girls became Margaret Matilda White in her performance piece, but she also talked about expectations on women in society that she wasn't, it wasn't the thing to do to become a photographer, so she actually left that all behind to become a mother. And there's all of those kind of social ideas which we tied into economic well-being because of the expectations that are put on to women in that particular time period.
Does this the young women who are working on that, does it surprise them that such constriction was laid upon women's lives in those days? Or, I mean, did it make it come alive for them? They probably knew it intellectually, but wouldn't have thought how sad that would be for someone who had to squash a talent.
And I think for them it's really relevant because they're all very passionate theatre practitioners, and that's kind of where they want to go in their lives, but how they balance that with getting a job to pay the rent or that kind of thing is it's something that they have to consider.
Have there been, just finally, any personal surprises for you in the work that you've seen emerging from this project?
I mean, every time I go to one of their workshops, I'm surprised and impressed by the articulation of our young people in our city. And I mean, two that spring to mind that we haven't talked about. One of them is Te Korowai is a program that works with young youth offenders, and so with them we address the issue of education, and because effectively they've all fallen out of the education system, so where do they go? They resort to a life of crime. That's something that's kind of inbred into their families and those kind of things. We enabled them with cameras, and they did photography as their creative output. And just
sounds fantastic.
Yeah,
Sounds like a vital exhibition and on a very vital topic. November 3 it opens, Urbanlife at the Auckland Museum.
Yes.
Good luck with it. Hope it goes well.
Thank you.